Well, good morning, everybody. Here's the plan for today's forecast video. I want to talk about temperatures first. We're going to walk into a multi-model analysis on the rainfall that's coming up, get a good discussion there about the tropical moisture that is pushing into Mexico and that I think continues to stay uncorked out of the Gulf of Mexico for a while. I want to discuss where the jet stream pattern is going to live because of this temperature pattern and how that's going to continue to draw that moisture. And then I want to take a look at just a little bit of longer range information. Don't have anything brand new for you today with respect to long range, but we just need to be looking at a few things that are flanking North America. And I want to talk a bit about international weather. So that's the plan. This temperature map just goes back from May 1st through June 18th, and it shows you average temperature ranks by climate district. And while the southern tier of the United States, for example, from Texas all the way to Florida, is having one of its hottest starts to summer and late spring time periods, you can also see that much of the Mississippi Valley and the entirety of the East has had a very warm start to this year. This is an average temperature ranks map. And what is important to note here is that some of the overnight lows in this area have been quite warm as well. I mean, I live right here, and we got down to like 75 last night. So we just have to be thinking about what that kind of warm air can be doing when you keep the warm air around for so late at night. And if that continues when we get later in the season, especially into July and August, that could be a major stressor on crops in this region. So I want to keep that in the back of our minds as we go forward. But to be honest with you, while there's a lot of attention, and it deserves it, of the heat advisories and watches and warnings that stretch from the Ohio Valley through the Northeast, I want to just spend a moment thinking about the cooler backside of this system. So if you take a look at these temperature ranks for the Northwest as an example, here we are in the bottom half of the distribution. And while we've had warmer stretches of days come through, it's been 2-3 days of warmer conditions, and it just crashes right back down. And the lack of early season accumulation of heat here is something that just is going to need to continue to be discussed. Now, we've been pouring the heat into the Southwest. It's been coming into California's Central Valley, but I'm just thinking about this and to the north of this. So unfortunately, my maps stop right at the U.S.-Canada border here, but if you go a bit farther north, the last 30 days really shows you that contrast. Now, what's the point in talking about this? Well, there's one big picture idea. The reason the jet stream exists, and again, we think about the jet stream as something that's going to guide storm systems. We think about it in terms of its ability to create what we call areas of upper level divergence in the flow and convergence in the flow, which ultimately guides high and low pressure system development. Well, what starts the jet stream, why it exists, is because of a poleward temperature gradient. So you can see from Texas to north central Saskatchewan, the temperature differences are large. And if you want to find the jet, just go right in between it, and that's where it'll live. And if this temperature contrast is maintained as we finish June and start July, the best flow is going to roll across the 49th parallel, and that's where I think it's going to be for quite a bit, which means we're going to have ridges that maybe start here like the one we have this week. It may flatten out and come down into the southern plains. It may at times even come over to the southwest, but there will be ridging in this area, which means the only other component of this equation we have to think about is where do the ridges prefer to live, and do they block this, which is the flow from the Gulf of Mexico. And that's going to be our story going forward this year. It's not going to be a story where we talk about La Nina all summer. It's going to be a story about the ocean temperature contrast in the North Pacific, the temperature contrast across North America, and if there's any way by which the whole pattern gets blocked and loses momentum. That's been a theme I've had for a while. Now, just in the last 7 days, that contrast has really shown up again here, and we can see that while the central U.S. to the southeast, stretching up to the Great Lakes, has brought in some heat, and of course now, this is the area that's going to go over very hot. It already has, and it will continue to do so. The cooler area that's here in parts of the Canadian Prairie in the Northwest remains. I just want to show you a couple of things. This is a picture sent to me yesterday by Twyla Jones. She took it yesterday morning. And she works for Nutrien up in the Canadian Prairie, and she travels a lot. But home base, I believe, is out of her part of Alberta. And she sent me a picture of her roof, which has frost on it. And to her recollection and her colleagues' recollection, they think this is the latest frost event they've ever witnessed. She didn't anticipate a lot of damage, but the fact of the matter is it got cold enough to do that to her roof. Don't forget, the same kind of anchor of cold air is also what delivered the snow into parts of Montana, Idaho, and even into the Cascades and parts of Wyoming as well here in the last 72 hours. And it was great to see some comments on YouTube, but also seeing some pictures just on Twitter of folks like, it's snowing in June. But that's what this pattern's been able to do. It's been able to just separate very effectively where that cold air is and not really given it much of a chance to retreat. So this morning, one of the first maps I look at every day, especially in spring and then again in fall, is my frost map. And we noticed that while this was expected, the newest forecast started to show right here in this part of North Dakota, getting into Wyoming, these patchy areas of frost showing up. And the National Weather Service was on top of this early this morning as well. So late last night, they started to issue frost advisories in this area. We still had the frost advisories on the northern side and eastern side of the Snake River Valley and here in parts of Nevada. And that I went looking for it just to see if early this morning, just before the sun rose, if we did dip down below 32 at any of our weather stations. But to see these 36s, 35s, 37s, 34 right in through here in this part of Montana, Wyoming, there were areas here that did touch a frost this morning. And yeah, it's June 19th when that happened. But back to the all hazards weather map, stretching from parts of Illinois and Indiana clear through the Ohio Valley all the way to Maine. This is where we have a large area that's just seeing daytime temperatures, getting way up there into the mid to upper 90s and plenty of moisture. I mean, the atmosphere is juiced in this area, and it's making these heat index values so high, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about just from your other weather sources. So I'm just thinking about where these temperatures are going. And first of all, I want to just show you some min temperatures. So you want to know how we can really tell how humid the atmosphere is just look at your minimum temperatures. I mean, last night, this morning, only being able to get down into the mid 70s in this area, we expect that down along the Gulf Coast, but here, that's much above average for minimum temperature. And the good news is that in terms of a frost threat, this was primarily an event this morning. By the time we get into tomorrow, Thursday, into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, while we still have some cooler air coming in, I think that frost threat is out. So it was really just a this morning kind of event in those areas we just highlighted. Max temperatures, much cooler on the backside of this front. This is a pretty strong front. We just think if you go from like Chicago over to Sioux Falls, we've got a 22-degree temperature gradient into this area, and that's going to be where we're going to have to watch and discuss where the rainfall will be. But just take a look at the high temperatures today underneath this ridge that's expanding and how cold it is on the backside of this. So this is Wednesday getting into Thursday's high temperatures, and Friday, we're going to watch this ridge kind of expand farther to the south. I think Saturday will be its most expansive view. We're also going to see some heat building into the western United States as the colder air just kind of dives right into this corridor. And it is kind of amazing to see that for West Texas and New Mexico, 92 is cool for this time of year. But again, this is all cloud cover driven by the tropical system in that area, which we'll talk more about in a moment. There's Sunday into Monday. We'll play out there to next Tuesday. And overall, you can just see it, right? There's that contrast. If you stay south of this area where you are in, the hot, humid air, north of it, the cooler, drier air, and in between this where the front is, where all the precipitation pattern is going to get loaded. There is still a model discrepancy going out there day 5 through 10 and day 10 through 15. So this is the GFS forecast. When I make this, I compare it to a data set called the CFSR. The data goes from 1991 to 2020. That's my climatological average. And I just compare the forecast to the historical values. And that's what you see here. Now, this is expected, but are we really going to be driving a lot of cooler air into this region or near normal temperatures? Because it's also there out in the day 10 to 15. You see, I ask that because the European model, that's day 5 through 10. So see how it's keeping more of that warmer air farther to the north right along the 49th, rather than driving it at times into the upper Midwest and northern plains. But farther out I play with this, we just continue to see that contrast we talked about lives here. And so what this will do is result in a very hot and I think very stormy summer in this area as we go forward, if this pattern maintains itself. And also I think that we're going to have a difficult time bringing in any sort of early season heat to the Canadian prairie, and that crop needs some heat. So I know growers in the Canadian prairie were happy with early rains. I know that they were happy to see the drought risk being beat back, but the reality of it being so cool as of late is now becoming a concern across the Canadian prairie, and they're going to need some heat on this crop to get it to go. I'm going to bring up one thing here real quick, which I didn't have in my slide deck, but you just need to see this, current ocean temperatures. What's driving a lot of this, in my opinion? Very warm Atlantic. So this is the power of evaporation, putting water in the lower atmosphere. Now, we could have this all day long and block it off, but we're not doing that. I think it's largely driven by the contrast in ocean temperatures here, pushing that jet stream there, keeping it cooler to the north and warmer to the south. And that's what's keeping the momentum alive. Now, you know that in any point in summer, sometimes even without warning, there can be a factor, something changing half a world away, maybe over parts of Asia. I don't know. Something can happen that just steals the momentum. Instead of letting it go this way, it starts to go north-south. And when that occurs, this warm water is still something that concerns me in a big way. Because if we end up developing, if the pattern just loses momentum, so if you want to know, Eric, what's keeping you up at night, it's if the pattern loses momentum. We'll ridge out here. We'll have some sort of a major ridge that just lives, I don't know, somewhere in the midsection of the country. Maybe it's over the Mid-South. Maybe it's over the Midwest. Maybe it's over the Great Lakes. And then we'll get another big ridge that'll live in this area. And I have a feeling that if, and that's a big if we lose the momentum and the pattern, you'll get to this. But we're not there yet. And so I just wanted to kind of keep you aware of that. So what did we end up getting? Well, this morning, this is the remnant cloud cover from last night's storms. Let me take you back and show you those. Watch them just unzip down this line. We had 3 tornado reports out of this. We had a lot of wind and hail damage out of this. And this large cloud shield is all complements of the northern edge of potential Tropical Cyclone 1. Now, yesterday I mentioned, hey, it's got a 70% chance of developing. I went with the National Hurricane Center's update on it. I am not a hurricane expert. I know a lot about hurricanes, but would never consider myself an expert in that. I felt pretty confident we were going to get a name out of this. But you'll see in a few moments that that's changed. But these storms, it just unzipped right here along this line, impressively large, and delivered some heavy rains into parts of Kansas, which we need to take a look at. But before I do that, I just want to show you wildfire smoke in New Mexico. There's also some in Mexico, and then the larger wildfires. Let me just animate that again. You can see here in parts of California as well. It continues to be just a concern I have going forward. So there's the hail I gathered from radar yesterday. And again, some of these storms right in through here really putting down some large hail. And if we take a look at total rainfall through 7 a.m. this morning, you can see just how wet it's been in parts of the upper Midwest, stretching back into parts of, Iowa, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, right into the panhandles. And the panhandles had been very dry. We did have some isolated storms that came out in that cloud shield that's on the northern side of this tropical system down here. But just wanted to point out where we've had that rain. Speaking of the tropical system, the National Hurricane Center now has downgraded this to a 30% chance of developing. Even though it looked pretty healthy on satellite yesterday, I'm guessing too much wind shear or too much interaction with land. It just never developed a solid convective core. So in other words, the point of circulation was well outside of where the deepest convection is going to be. But as you saw, we are keeping an eye on an area over here that's coming around the back side of that big ridge that we just need to watch here for possible tropical development and see where the moisture comes for that. And I also am keeping just a close eye on the rest of the Caribbean because there are some indications we could get something coming out of the Caribbean. So let's get into this precipitation forecast. Here's your next 7 days. This is the artificial intelligence forecasting system. And just thinking this through and comparing it to the NBM, which again shows some isolated convection in this area. Watch the moisture come into Florida, along the Gulf Coast, the flooding that will happen in southern Texas and New Mexico, the lingering fronts through here, and the storms that just ride the jet stream that's going to roll right into this area. This is the WPC forecast. Very similar. Sorry, let me shrink that up so you can see the whole map. Sorry about that. That's the WPC. This is the European model, and this is the GFS. Now, there's something about this pattern that's really grabbed my attention, and I want to talk just a bit about this. Not there, but here. I went out and made some maps that looked at the last 30 days of total accumulated precipitation as a percent of normal. And these are what my new maps are going to look like. I cannot wait to get these finished. But we kind of overlay some numbers just to add some context to this. So when you're looking at this, again, this is percent of normal. Now, we've talked a lot about what's going on in the Central Plains. And you can see that according to the AHPS, which remember, this is a lower resolution product, we've worked against some of the long-standing drought in parts of Kansas. We've not corrected. Let me be very clear on that. But we've worked against it. What I want to think about is this region in through here and in the southeast. So a couple of regional maps. 30-day percent of normal precipitation. And if you look in northwestern Illinois, southwestern Iowa, you then stretch this over into Indiana and Ohio, we can see these pockets here that even though there's a lot of discussion about how wet the Corn Belt is on the whole, that's not ubiquitous. It's not everywhere. And some of these places have seen less than half of their normal rainfall. And if you go south and east of this, all right, where, by the way, just before I leave, where we're expecting all that heavy rain in the last 30 days, we're 2 to 3 times our normal rainfall in this area already. But if you keep going south and east, this is what things look like. Oops, sorry. There it is. And I got several messages. I've received several messages from folks in Virginia, North and South Carolina, down into Georgia and northern Florida that are just saying, all right, we got it. We have got to get some moisture back in this system. Now, we're not on the drought monitor yet, but remember, the drought monitor is a long-term statistical evaluation of drought. It includes hydrology. It includes, agricultural drought situations. It, of course, talks about meteorological drought, which would be the rainfall side of it, and it also includes the socioeconomic side of it. That all of that, though, is a long-term statistic. The near-term flash drought scenario is what we need to be thinking about. And there are a lot of areas right in through here that are hurting. They've not seen much rain, and you know that the temperatures have been high. And so this is a flash drought scenario in this area. And what I'm afraid of, for me personally, and I think a lot of us do this, is we get a little backyarditis. That rectangle is mine. That's where I live. And around where I am, we've got the crop look amazing. We've got rain. You decide just around your area, and you can get into spots where it's just been dry. And if the soil moisture is not there to help the crop through this hot, dry time period, it can be stressful. Now, I'll just make a statement. It is June in this area, not July. If this was July, we'd have a whole nother story to talk about just because of crop stage. But I wanted to bring that up. Now we get back to the bigger picture idea. Those same areas are showing up over the next 7 days as being tucked too much inside of the ridge. And that's why their probability of staying under a half inch of rainfall is so high. This comes back to the Red River Valley as well. And if we could get some drier weather, maybe some drier weather at times in the Canadian Prairie, not a bad thing. But to be honest, this is an area we actually need some rain, right into this part of Alberta. All right, wetter side of this model will probably update. Oh, good, it didn't. If I play this forward, there is one thing that needs to be discussed. And you can see how the model's attempting to kind of fill in an area in through here. But for most of the next 10 days, it's pretty clear where the wettest conditions are going to be. There's the chance at 2 inches. Here's the chance at 4. So it's mainly coming out of the tropics here. And right where the jet stream lives here, that's where the moisture is going to move to. It's going to be lifted in this area, making clouds and storms. That's where we see the really wet conditions. So what I need to be paying attention to is, what's the jet stream doing? We'll walk through the models and be out of here, okay? So here you go. As we play forward, the large ridges over the east shifts itself by this weekend to live right over the Mid-South. And that's when that really hot, expansive Saturday time period is. But what I'm watching is this. Getting out to the 22nd and 23rd, the ridge goes from here to here. And we start to do this. These little waves. Now, normally, whenever we see these little short waves coming through, they're capable of initiating convection on the northern edge of the heat and send off these storms that tend to come rolling in like this. So there's like this corridor that opens up, maybe like the 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, that as the ridge slides down and little troughs sneak across the northern tier of the U.S., there it is, there's the ridge, that I think we need to be on the lookout for the risk of some ridge riding storms. And ridge riding storms tend to have a linear component to them, meaning that they tend to produce straight line wind damage. So I just want to make you aware that that's showing up in the pattern, even though the models may not materialize that far out in advance, because we're all the way to next Monday in this forecast. But you can clearly see where the jet lives. It's always south of the troughs. So that is Monday into Tuesday of next week. Another ridge kind of opens up midweek next week, getting into Thursday, Friday. I got some heat coming in, just waves of heat coming in, but broken down by troughs that keep sneaking in here. And so we need to see how the storms evolve on that pattern. Now, I'm going to show you the models because we need to look at them, but just understand that they're not going to pick up on those subtleties. They're not designed to. They just can't. So here's Thursday into Friday, into Saturday. I mean, you can see where the storm track is. It's right across the northern tier of the U.S., the Great Lakes. Here's the tropical stuff. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. The atmosphere is trying to show that it's going to be able to produce these storms in this area, but it's not showing up well in the model. So I just want you to understand that if you go to my website, agweather.com, you start playing around with this, you're looking at these things. There's a reason why I spend more time showing you these maps than I show you the other ones, because I think when you look at the cumulative values, you get a better sense of what's going on. So from there, let's take you out to this map. What about week 2? In all 3 scenarios, the CPC, the ECMWF, and the GFS, they are starting to see, I'll just pick on the European model as an example. They're really starting to see this corridor opening back up for storms. Now, this is where I'm getting concerned. Can we get them all the way into parts of the Mid-Atlantic, the Carolinas? That's a very, very dry area that needs to get some moisture back into place. So I'll be top concern for me over the next couple of weeks to see if we can undo some of that drought in that area. Okay, one other thing. Risk of heavy rainfall in this pattern, upper Midwest, coast. Risk of hot temperatures going out to the beginning of July. It's always going to live south of where the contrast is here. So this is where we're going to just stay with the heat. From there, quick international update. Next 10 days, we did want to take note that we're getting some cooler weather finally back into parts of Western Russia. Central Europe is still hot, but some cooler weather here. And if you take a look right here into India, the cooler weather is finally because the Indian monsoon is beginning its northward advance. It should already be up in the Ganges River Valley, but it's not there yet, so it's a late start to the monsoon. Ukraine, though, even with some of the cooler weather coming in, and parts of this section of the Russian wheat belt are still showing up drier. We are much wetter in the forecast for a big section of Western Australia, which I showed you yesterday was in drought. Same thing for parts of South Australia, down here toward like Adelaide and the very productive ground around this part of South Australia. These rains are a must-have if this does manifest itself and really come through. Lastly, just take a look at South America. The rains are done here. They've been done for weeks, but still heavy rains in southern Brazil may be affecting some late harvest. And Argentina is warm this week and cool next. So that's all I got for you today. And we'll just keep watching it, and we'll talk more about this. Oh, no, I don't. I have one more thing. I'm sorry. One more slide. Here we go. I told you it'd be some long range. Sorry, I went and visited family. I hadn't seen some of my family in a long time, so we drove over and saw them last night. And we just got to working on stuff and fixing the neighbor's lawn and working on some tractors. And then got to be about 10:30 and still had an hour and a half drive home. So I'm going to blame that. I had a great time seeing family, though. But here's my last bit. Getting into July. Remember where we started this? I don't know. I'm just going to park this July 14th. The models are painting higher atmospheric pressure here and higher atmospheric pressure there and not here. And I'm confused by that. And I want to know what keeps the momentum going. So if you'd like to know what is front of mind for me, it's this. I would have thought that if we could build higher pressure in the North Atlantic, higher pressure in the North Pacific, closer to the Aleutian Islands in Japan than it is the West Coast, that I would be concerned a bit more about another big ridging event in the central U.S. But this is a pressure map, and it's just not showing it. And the only explanation, one explanation is that over this time period, if I just look at 30 days, it's just keeping it hot. Maybe it's lower pressure induced by heat. I'm just going to say, watch for anything to stop the Gulf. I don't see that happening, but if it does, it's going to change things up. The precipitation anomalies, I'm going to show them to you, but I don't like looking at them. They're so biased toward the near term. But this is the 30-day outlook from June 18 to July 18. Now I'm going to stop. Have a good one. We'll talk tomorrow. Thanks.